Turning 16 is kind of scary, especially when you don't expect to see yourself sitting in a police station. Hi, I'm Jess, and I went from being a nerdy kid who loved Nancy Drew and Agatha Christie novels to a young adult that solved one of the biggest murder plots in Brookhaven, 31,000 feet above the sky. You see, growing up in a strict household, I was always taught that going outside had its dangers. My dad is a retired cop, right? And he always talks about his crime-fighting days with the police force. So, not a day goes by where he doesn't recall that his life was always at risk. I was hella impressed that he gave selflessly to help others, and kinda wanted to do the same thing. My mother? Well, she's a paranoid skeptic who fell in love with a cop and believed that there was always someone watching us. Then they had me, and as you might have guessed, I lived for the thrill and danger. I chalk it up to all the spy novels I've read, the stories from Dad, and mainly because Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes were huge inspirations for me. Naturally, I wanted to be like them. Why? For me, nothing was more satisfying in life than solving a big case like my idols did. But how do you become as smart as them? Well, I started honing my skills from junior high. I gotta say that I was never the typical girl, obsessed with gossiping and boys and makeup. I hated cheerleading, and I basically sucked at all things girly. I spent most of my high school days solving real issues, like why Karen broke up with Kyle, the mystery of the stolen school laptops, and why the lunch lady never smiled. My school was a really interesting place. Think of 13 Reasons Why and Riverdale Had a Baby. There you have it. The drama at my school was like watching High School Musical on Disney, but with a sitcom of Hannah Montana. It was nuts. But they were lucky, because they had me, Detective Jess, on the case. I was at the center of every rumor and every gossip. How could I not be? I was undercover as a nerd, and no one would expect Four Eyes spying on them and exchanging information with the mean girls. But if you're someone whose dream is to be the next best detective of all time, then you gotta do what you gotta do. And trust me, I did. Have you realized yet that I made a big mistake? What is it, you ask? Take a guess. All my amazing sleuthing and spy work caused my nerd cover to be blown. Because I was just that good. It's because of that I became one of the most popular girls at school. Normal, right? But that's not the worst thing that could happen to a person. The day that I solved the case about why the lunch lady never smiled, and by the way, it was because she lost her cat, I went home early because I wanted to avoid my fans. Everyone in school knew who I was by then. I failed miserably at keeping a low profile, and I was having serious doubts about calling myself a detective. So, I had to think about what to do next. Obviously, I couldn't go to school wearing a mustache, and changing my identity would cost a fortune. I spent that whole day pacing back and forth until I decided to turn on the TV, and that's when I got my next big case. That was the day that changed my life. I found out that my favorite actress, Emma Jeffries, had barely escaped a murder plot on her life, and the suspect, or suspects, were still at large. I don't know why I felt drawn to this case, but I just knew I had to help her. Maybe it was because in all her movies she was like this baddie detective or banging spy girl. I don't know. But let's face it, all of us are inspired by greatness when we see people we admire doing it and making it look easy, right? Anywho, why listen to me? I'm just a 16-year-old girl chasing her dreams. So fearlessly, I dug in and I set up my base of operations in my bedroom. Time was not on my side, but thankfully, I lived in a big city and in a resourceful household. I told you that my dad was an ex-cop, right? And, well, not just an ex-cop, but the FBI? That meant I had access to the police databases, plus more. I was sure that the cops would have a list of suspects by now, and I needed to know who was at the top of their list. But before I did that, I noticed something strange in all of the magazine clippings that I'd gathered on Emma. In every single one, there was a decisively odd-looking bald guy that gave me the creeps. And he was always just in the shadows. I had to know who he was. So I threw caution to the wind, entered my dad's room, and hacked into the FBI database. My mission was to catch the murderer. To get all the info I needed, I would have to trail Emma Jeffries. But knowing what you know about my mother, it was not gonna be easy getting out of the house. So I had to resort to devious methods in order to do a proper investigation. I almost forgot that I lived with a hardcore paranoid skeptic. What would you do if you were in my shoes, huh? I did what every teenager does best. No, I did not run away from home. I told my parents that I was going to bed. I put some sheets in the bed and snuck out to trail Emma. I think my mom guessed I was up to something because she gave me this sus look. But Dad just chalked it up to growing up and hormones and said, "Honey, just give her some space, okay? She'll be just fine." Now it was the middle of the night, and I had to know where Emma was going to be the next day. But it looked like my mom was doing her own investigation on me, because every time I got up to leave and hack into the FBI database, I could hear my mom right outside my door. "This girl is going to be the death of me. I know she's up to no good." Like, what the heck, Mom? Since I couldn't get out through the door, I had to go through my window and then sneak back around and into the study. But it was all worth it to find out that Emma Jeffries was headed to Paris in a few days. And I don't know how or why, but I needed to be there as well. The next morning, I woke up early. I couldn't sleep. And I didn't know if it was because of my anxiety or excitement to solve the case. Now I just needed to convince my parents to send me to Paris. Ridiculous, right? You would be surprised by how persuasive I could be. Plus, I got some help from my aunt, who actually lived in Paris. She was a filthy rich businesswoman, and Mom always listened to her. I ran into the living room and broke down in tears. Yes, parents these days still can't stand to see their children cry. My dad's heart already melted, but my mom knew I was up to something. But my aunt said, "Oh, Darlene, she's only young once, and it's for school." Unfortunately, alarms went off and they thought that I was drafted for World War I. Yes, that's how nuts my mother was. She got up, looked me in the eye, and said, "I don't know what you're up to, but God does." Jeez, I knew I was a little rebellious, but come on. I had to solve this case that could either make me or break me. Dad was silent that day. He was contemplating my life's choices, but in the end, he surprised me. He believed my lie and told me that I could go. Now, there was only one problem that I didn't foresee. the place and time of departure. I knew that I was still young and inexperienced as compared to my idol Sherlock Holmes, but this could be a serious problem. But thanks to my quick thinking, I hacked into Emma's computer and found all her travel info. Sheesh, close, right? I found out that she was going to be flying later that day, which gave me just enough time to book my flight and pack. Dad dropped me off at the airport, and all Mom said as I was leaving was, "I'll be praying for you, young lady." When I entered the airport, the paparazzi was already there waiting for any opportunity to get shots of Emma. I stood around blending into the crowd, and I absent-mindedly put my hands in my pocket to feel for the taser that Dad had given me when he dropped me off. It didn't even look like a taser, but it was high-tech FBI stuff, and it made me less anxious. As I looked around, I suddenly noticed my idol sitting in the waiting area. I immediately scanned the seats nearby, looking for my suspect or any person that looked like a murderer. And guess who was sitting inches away from Emma? Yep, that freaky-looking bald guy. My heart dropped to the floor as adrenaline rushed through my body. I made sure not to make eye contact with Mr. Freaky because, man, he had that straight-out-of-a-horror movie look about him. And I wasn't taking any chances to get made out before I could nab him. So I just stood by on high alert. We waited for departure. But just before it was starting to feel like a year passed by, we began to board. I sat on the opposite side of Emma Jeffries in business class, and the suspect sat several seats behind her. Being a celebrity, it was only natural that she was on her phone. The plane was in the air, and it just occurred to me that this was the moment that Emma was in danger. Suddenly, I saw the bald man get up and rush toward Emma. He screamed something that sounded like, "You're mine!" In that moment, I don't know what came over me, but I felt the biggest adrenaline rush of my life. I jumped up, pulled out my taser, remembering what my dad said, and tased the murderer at his 6. Emma Jeffries got up, visibly shaken, and the whole plane was shocked at what happened. Suddenly, the crowd cheered, realizing that a serious crime had been averted, and Emma herself thanked me. The cops were called, and the whole incident came on the news once the plane did an emergency landing in Brookhaven. I became the talk of the town for days, along with Emma. And before she left, we took selfies together, and she gave me her autograph. And that's how I ended up in a police station. After the police took my statement and asked how I knew the murderer would be at the airport, I confessed and shared with them how I tracked Emma Jeffries and caught the killer in the act. At first, I thought I was going to be in jail, but then the chief of police changed my life forever. I was offered a full-time role as a detective after I finished high school. I was the proudest 16-year-old, like, ever! And my dad was the happiest man alive. That's the day I knew that I'd be the world's greatest detective. And sure enough, I am the best of the best, working for all the top spy agencies, MI6, the CIA, plus ones that you've never even heard of. And that's my story of how I caught a murderer at 31,000 feet. I'm glad that I got the chance to tell my story on my favorite channel, Majestic Plays. And if you want to see more stories just like mine, then hit the like button, subscribe, and comment. We want more Majestic.